My name is Walter Brigham. I'm 81 years old, and I live alone in the house I built with my own hands 50 years ago, back when my knees still bent easily, and I thought concrete would outlast grief. The neighborhood's changed, of course. Used to be mostly retirees like me, then came the young couples, and now it's all Airbnbs and gardeners who don't speak English. But my house, beige brick, with the dented mailbox and sagging awning out front, stayed the same. I mowed the lawn every Saturday until about a year ago, when the doctor told me I had age-appropriate degeneration in my spine. I told him there's nothing appropriate about losing your ability to push a mower. Still, I hired a service. I refused to let the grass rot just because my bones got soft. Most mornings I wake up at 5:30. That's when the sun hits the blinds and my bladder says it's time. I sit on the edge of the bed, rub my knees, and wait for the vertigo to settle. Then I shuffle to the kitchen, the linoleum cold under my heels, and make coffee. Drip, black, no sugar. The same way Janine used to make it. My wife died 7 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. She was gone 5 weeks after diagnosis. Still had the yellowing pamphlet from the hospital on coping with loss on the dining room table the day she passed. As if grief could be coached like a little league team. Janine left the house clean. She always did that. I remember how she'd scrub the sinks before we went on vacation, just in case we die. She'd say, laughing. She didn't want people to find toothpaste stains on the porcelain. After she was gone, I kept the routine. Made the bed. Watered her violets. Watched the shows we used to mock together. I still chuckle when the weatherman says, mild chance of precipitation, because Janine would always shout, say rain, you coward. It's the kind of laughter that ends with a sigh. My daughter Sarah lives 30 minutes away in Eden Prairie. I used to drive there myself, back when I still trusted my reflexes, but she insisted I stop after I hit a parking sign at the grocery store. Dad, it's not safe, she said, as if safety mattered more than dignity. So now, if she wants to see me, she has to come here. That is, when she remembers. She used to visit every other week, bringing the grandkids, sometimes even cooking dinner. Now it's holidays, if I'm lucky. And when she does come, it's all rushed. Don't eat too much salt, Dad. And you should get a walk-in tub. She talks to me like I'm already half gone. I used to think she did it out of concern, but over the years I started noticing a shift. Subtle at first. Less eye contact, more checking her phone. Then came the suggestions. Have you thought about assisted living? Maybe you could sell the house, move into one of those retirement communities. They have group activities. You'd like that. I told her once, I don't want activities, I want silence. She didn't laugh. What hurt the most wasn't the suggestion. It was the tone, like she was trying to manage me, not talk to me. Like I was a loose end in her life she needed to tie up. And yet, despite the distance, despite the sting of being a fixture instead of a father, I still looked forward to her visits. I'd clean the house a day before, iron a shirt, buy the crackers the grandkids liked. Hope is stubborn. Last spring, Sarah asked me if I'd consider staying with her while the contractors did repairs on her kitchen. Just 2 weeks, she said. We can watch movies, Dad. The kids would love having you around. That was a lie. They barely looked up from their tablets. But I agreed. Partly because I wanted to believe her. Partly because I was tired of eating alone. She gave me the guest room, a narrow bed and a shelf full of scented candles. I couldn't sleep. Everything smelled like coconut and anxiety. Her husband barely spoke to me. The boys grunted. Sarah worked late. After a week, I packed my bag, called a cab, and went home. She was angry. You didn't even say goodbye. I told her there was nothing to say. Since then, she hasn't visited. Not once. She called occasionally, mostly to ask if I'd seen her emails or gotten the birthday card she sent late. I'd tell her yes, even when I hadn't. The silence between us was like furniture, always there, always in the way. So I went back to my rituals. Morning coffee, midday walk to the mailbox, evening news. I fed the squirrels. I reread Janine's cookbooks, even though I don't cook anything more complicated than soup. I lived the quiet life until she called again, 2 months ago, asking if she and the boys could stay here for a few days. The plumbing at her place had gone haywire. The house was unlivable. Her voice was soft, apologetic. I hesitated. The memory of those candles still sharp. But I said yes. Because I still remembered the girl who once drew me pictures with hearts and called me her #1 best daddy. She arrived with 2 carloads of luggage and a strange man I'd never met. "This is Marcus," she said, like that meant something to me. No explanation, no apology. Just a man in my foyer shaking my hand like he was entitled to be there. The boys didn't look up. They carried gaming consoles and beanbag chairs like they were moving into a dorm. At first, I told myself it was temporary. A few nights. I gave up my room without protest and slept in the basement, where the dehumidifier buzzed like a bad dream. But I began to notice things. Dishes in the sink I hadn't used, lights left on, strangers coming in and out. I heard laughter in the night from behind my bedroom door, my bed, my sheets, my memories. That's when something inside me shifted. It started with a smell, not something offensive, not rot or mildew, but foreign, a cologne I didn't recognize, sharp and synthetic, like the kind they give away in gyms. I noticed it when I came upstairs one morning to get aspirin from the bathroom cabinet. The hallway felt warmer than usual, as if too many bodies had been inside overnight. The guest room door was ajar, but I didn't peek in. I didn't have to. I knew my daughter wasn't the type to use perfume like that. And Marcus? Well, I didn't know him at all. Still don't. He wasn't her boyfriend, she insisted, just a close friend who needed a place to crash for a few nights. That phrase, crash, irritated me. It wasn't a motel. It was my home, my room. Later that day, I walked into the kitchen and found a pair of muddy boots by the back door, size 12 at least. A denim jacket was draped over one of the dining chairs. Next to it was an ashtray. An ashtray. I haven't smoked in 40 years, and Sarah knows it. Janine was allergic to smoke, used to carry tissues in her purse to cover her nose if someone lit up nearby. That ashtray felt like a slap. I picked it up with a paper towel and put it in the garage, next to the broken lawn mower and rusted garden shears. Out of sight, but not out of mind. That evening, I sat in the living room, pretending to read while the muffled bass of someone's music rattled the floorboards. The voices upstairs were casual, relaxed. Not a trace of apology or consideration. I wanted to confront Sarah right then, but I didn't. I waited until the next morning when I found Marcus, shirtless in the kitchen, eating my cereal straight from the box. He didn't say good morning, just nodded and left the crumbs on the counter. I followed the sound of the TV to the den, where Sarah was curled up with her laptop. "Who's sleeping in my room?" I asked. She looked up slowly, as if I'd interrupted something of great importance. "Marcus," she said. "It's just for a few nights, Dad. His girlfriend kicked him out. Your room has 2 beds." She rolled her eyes. "He needs privacy. Besides, the boys are using the guest room now. They like the Wi-Fi better in there. So where am I supposed to sleep?" "You've been in the basement," she said flatly. "You said it was fine." "I didn't say it was fine. I didn't say anything at all." "Well, it's temporary. Don't make it a thing." "Don't make it a thing," I repeated, stunned by her tone. You've invited strangers into my house, into my bed, and you tell me not to make it a thing? She closed her laptop with a sigh, like I was a technical issue she had to troubleshoot. Dad, you're being dramatic. You don't even sleep up there anymore. That's not the point. Then what is? You have a bed, you have food, we're not hurting anyone. I stared at her, searching her face for the girl I raised. The one who used to beg me to carry her on my shoulders in the park. The one who cried when her goldfish died. She wasn't there. In her place sat a woman who had moved herself into my home like it was her birthright, who saw my things not as belongings, but as furniture for her convenience. I want them out, I said finally. Today. She blinked. Dad. I'm serious, Sarah. Marcus, his friends, whoever else is coming through that door. This isn't a boarding house. She stood up, arms folded. You're overreacting. It's just a few people. They're in a rough spot. So was I after your mother died. I didn't invite half the city to sleep in our bedroom. Her face darkened. Don't guilt me with Mom. I'm not. I'm reminding you whose house this is. Do you even hear yourself? You sound like one of those bitter old men yelling at clouds. Maybe I am, but I have the right to yell under my own roof. She shook her head in disbelief. You don't understand, Dad. Things are different now. People help each other. This isn't help, it's trespassing. Fine. She threw her hands in the air. You want us gone? We'll leave. But don't call me when you fall and can't get up. Don't expect me to drop everything and come running. I haven't expected anything from you in years. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. She turned and walked away, slamming the door behind her. A moment later I heard footsteps on the stairs, followed by hushed voices and the sound of zippers. I didn't move. I just stood in the middle of the room, one hand on the chair back, feeling my pulse in my ears. The silence that returned felt heavier than before. Not peaceful. Hollow, like a bell that had been struck too hard. Around noon, she came back downstairs alone. We're staying one more night, she said coldly. Marcus is moving out tomorrow. The boys need to finish schoolwork, and I'm not dragging them around. I didn't respond. She glared at me, waiting for a fight, but I gave her nothing. That night, I locked my bedroom door from the inside and slept on the mattress, fully clothed. I didn't trust anyone not to walk in. The sheets smelled like cheap aftershave and someone else's sweat. I lay staring at the ceiling, wondering when it had happened, the moment I stopped being a father and became an obstacle. There was no date, no event, just a slow erosion of respect until all that remained was utility. I woke up early and walked to the shed. I still had the spare keys to every room, including the back entrance. I found them in the old coffee tin where Janine used to keep buttons. I held them in my hand for a while, then put them in my coat pocket and went back inside. Sarah and the boys were asleep. The house was quiet, peaceful in a way I hadn't felt in weeks. I made coffee, sat at the table, and stared out the window as the sky turned pink. Then I made a decision. The next day began with silence that felt loaded. The kind of silence that hums just before a thunderstorm, thick with things unsaid, and tension coiled tightly around every movement. Sarah didn't speak to me at breakfast. She stood at the counter, scrolling through her phone, nursing coffee like it was a sedative. The boys came downstairs late, grunted something that passed for a greeting, then disappeared again. Marcus was nowhere to be seen. I didn't ask where he'd gone. I didn't care. All I cared about was that last night I'd taken back the keys. I waited until Sarah went into the shower, then I walked through the house methodically and gathered every extra copy of the house keys I could find. One was hanging by the mudroom door, another in a decorative dish on the hallway table, 2 more were in her purse, I saw them the night before when she left it open on the dining chair. I didn't feel guilty. Not anymore. I had spent weeks feeling like a guest in my own home, tiptoeing around my own kitchen and enduring strangers on my sofa, while my own daughter used my hospitality like a debit card. The final set of keys, the ones Marcus had to retrieve more creatively. I knew he kept his duffel bag in the hall closet. While everyone was busy with their screens and cereal, I opened the zipper and found what I was looking for: a black keychain with a skull and 2 house keys. I replaced the rest of his belongings exactly as they were. I didn't want confrontation. I wanted control. Later that afternoon, Sarah came into the living room and asked if I had seen her car keys. I told her I hadn't. She gave me a hard look but didn't press. "Marcus is coming back tomorrow," she added. "He left some things. He won't be staying," I said quietly, not looking up from the paper. She exhaled loudly through her nose. "We already discussed this." "Number, you talked." I listened. "That's not a discussion." Her jaw tightened. "You're being unreasonable. This is why people don't help you, because you push them away." I folded the paper and set it down. "He's not coming back here. Not as a guest, not as a tenant, not even as a memory." She blinked at me, stunned. "Are you serious?" "I've never been more serious in my life. You can't just make decisions like that without consulting me." "I just did." "It's my house. I gave you space when you needed it. I gave up my bed, my quiet, my privacy, and you gave it away to a stranger. He's not a stranger to me, but he's a stranger to me. And you never asked if that mattered." Her expression flickered, the way someone's face does when they realize they've crossed a line, but don't want to admit it. "You're being dramatic again." "Number, I'm being clear." She stared at me for a long moment, then walked away. No shouting, no tears, just that same cold withdrawal that had become her weapon of choice. I watched her climb the stairs, her shoulders stiff with offense. That evening, while she was out buying groceries, Marcus returned. I was sitting on the porch. He walked up like he owned the sidewalk, carrying a 6-pack and a grin that made my stomach turn. "Hey, Mr. B," he said. I left my charger upstairs. "It's not there." He stopped mid-step. "What?" "Your things are in the garage. You're not staying here anymore." He chuckled, not taking me seriously. "Sarah said I could stay until the weekend." I said you couldn't. That overrides it. His grin faded. "Look, man, I don't want any trouble. I just need a place for a couple more nights. I'll be out before Monday. You've had enough nights under my roof. You drank my coffee, used my towels, slept in my bed. That generosity is over." He looked at me for a long time, then gave a little shake of his head. "You're something else, you know that? No wonder she doesn't want to visit. Take your things, Marcus. Don't come back." He stood there for a moment like he wanted to say more, maybe threaten, maybe plead. But then he turned and walked toward the garage. A minute later, I heard the door slam, followed by the sound of boxes being dragged across the floor. Sarah returned just as Marcus was driving away in his beat-up Jeep. She pulled into the driveway and watched him go, her face unreadable. Then she walked up the steps with 2 bags of groceries and an expression like granite. "What did you do?" she asked before she even set the bags down. "I asked him to leave. For good." "You had no right." "I had every right. He had nowhere else to go." "That's not my responsibility. He's not my child. You are." She put the bags down hard enough that something inside rattled. "You don't get to make these decisions unilaterally." "I just did." She stared at me, then said something I'll never forget. "I'm going to fix this, Dad. One way or another." There was something in her voice that chilled me. It wasn't just anger. It was purpose, a calculation. The same tone she used once when telling me she'd convinced the insurance company to double a payout. She was no longer asking. She was planning. The next day she took the boys and left, said they were going back to her place. The repairs were mostly done anyway. She didn't hug me. She didn't even say goodbye. Just gathered her things, stuffed the trunk, and drove off with her mouth a thin, tight line. For the first time in weeks, the house was silent again. But it wasn't peaceful. It felt wounded, like a dog that had been kicked out of its own kennel. That night, I checked every door and window twice. I made sure the locks worked, that the cameras I'd installed after Janine died were still functioning. I sat by the window in the dark, sipping cold tea and listening to the wind. Something told me Sarah wasn't done. And for the first time, I realized I wasn't angry. I was afraid. It was a Thursday afternoon when the letter arrived. No return address, just my name in tight, officious handwriting. I opened it slowly, half expecting some generic newsletter or insurance solicitation. What I found instead was a legal notice, a petition filed with the county court by my daughter, Sarah Brigham, seeking temporary guardianship over my estate and person, citing concerns about cognitive decline, poor judgment, and unsafe living conditions. I read the words once, then again, as if they might rearrange themselves into something less absurd. But there it was, plain as daylight. My own daughter was asking the state to take my autonomy away. The letter claimed I was frequently confused, unable to manage basic financial responsibilities, and had endangered myself by refusing medical care. It referenced no specific incidents, only vague phrases like observed disorientation and increasing social withdrawal. The part that twisted in my gut was the list of proposed powers Sarah had requested. Access to my bank accounts, control over property decisions, the ability to authorize medical treatments. In other words, she wanted everything. I sat down hard in the kitchen chair, the paper trembling in my hand. I'd suspected she might retaliate after I kicked Marcus out, but this was war. A calculated move, cloaked in concern, written in the language of bureaucracy but poisoned with betrayal. For years I had ignored the signs, convinced myself that the coldness was just stress, that her distance was the natural drift between generations. But now she had drawn a line in legal ink. And I knew then that what I thought was resentment was something far deeper, a hunger. The next morning I contacted Martin Selby, the same attorney who'd helped me draft Janine's will. He was a soft-spoken man in his 60s with a white mustache and a knack for remembering obscure clauses in real estate contracts. When I explained the situation, he didn't act surprised. In fact, he said something that both chilled and affirmed me. "Mr. Brigham, I've had 5 cases just like this in the past year. It's always the same pattern. Adult children pushing for guardianship over aging parents with assets. You're not alone." I didn't want to be part of some quiet epidemic, but it comforted me to know I wasn't crazy. We filed a formal response within 48 hours, requesting a full psychological evaluation from a state-licensed geriatric psychiatrist. I insisted on it. "I want proof, Martin," I said. "Not just for the court, for myself. If I'm slipping, I need to know." The evaluation took place in a small office near the medical center. The doctor, a tall black woman named Doctor Llewellyn, greeted me with the kind of respect I hadn't felt in weeks. She asked questions about my daily routine, short-term memory, problem-solving, and emotional resilience. She had me draw a clock, repeat a sequence of numbers backward, and describe what I would do if I found a wallet on the street. It was exhausting, humiliating in its own way, but I understood the purpose. When it was over, she shook my hand and said, "Mr. Brigham, you're sharper than half the people I see in this building. If anyone tries to tell you otherwise, Send them to me." I cried in the parking lot, not out of relief, but out of grief, because I realized then how deeply I had doubted myself, how effective Sarah's campaign had been in eroding my confidence. Her words, confused, unreliable, fragile, had wormed their way into my skull like termites. And now that they had been proven false, I didn't feel victorious. I felt hollowed out. Martin submitted the results to the court. We also added financial records showing consistent bill payments, a grocery list written in clear handwriting, even the renewal notice for my car insurance, all small things, but together they painted a picture of competence. The court hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks out. Until then, I was left to wait, to wonder what Sarah would try next. And she did try. The next week, a social worker showed up at my door, claiming she had received an anonymous tip about an elderly man living in unsanitary and unsafe conditions. I let her in. The house was spotless. I'd cleaned it top to bottom the day before, anticipating something like this. She found nothing. In fact, she complimented the organization of my medicine cabinet. When she left, she gave me a look I'll never forget, a mix of sympathy and quiet fury. "Mr. Brigham," she said gently, "you're not the one who needs watching." I knew then that Sarah had no intention of stopping. She wasn't trying to protect me. She was trying to remove me, to claim the house, the bank accounts, the insurance policies. She wanted the paperwork of my life without the person it belonged to. But I wasn't gone yet. I wasn't fading. I was waking up, and I would not let her bury me while I was still breathing. A week before the court date, Sarah came back to the house. She didn't call first. I saw her car pull into the driveway at 9:43 a.m., a time I knew well because I had just sat down with my second cup of coffee and the crossword puzzle. She stepped out of the car in heels, wearing a sharp navy suit that screamed performance, not comfort. And for a split second I could almost believe she was coming for something benign. A reconciliation, an apology, a moment of humanity. But then she knocked twice, firmly, like someone delivering a subpoena, and when I opened the door, her smile was brittle enough to cut paper. "Hi, Dad," she said with a brightness that didn't reach her eyes. "Can we talk?" I didn't invite her in. I let the screen door stay between us. She looked annoyed, but not surprised. "I just came by to check in, make sure you're okay." I said nothing, just stood there, letting the silence expand. She adjusted her purse on her shoulder, glanced at the driveway as if expecting someone else to appear. "Look, I know you're upset. I know things got a little out of hand. But I want you to understand that none of this is personal. I'm just trying to make sure you're safe, that your affairs are in order." I laughed. Not a big laugh. Not joyful. Just a short, cracked exhale. "You mean my house, my accounts, my dignity?" She flinched at that, but recovered quickly. "That's not fair. Neither is trying to steal from someone while they're still breathing." She bristled. "I'm not stealing. I'm protecting. You've been confused, Dad. Erratic. Everyone sees it. No, Sarah. You see it because you need to see it. Because it makes what you're doing easier to justify." She stared at me through the screen, eyes sharp, unblinking. "Do you know what it's like, having a parent unravel in front of you? Watching them forget things, lash out, isolate themselves?" "Yes," I said flatly. "It's terrifying. I watched it happen to my own father, and I would never ever do to him what you're doing to me." She sighed, clearly rehearsed. "Then why are you resisting help? Why are you making this harder than it needs to be?" "Because I'm not your patient. I'm not your child. I'm your father, and I remember everything." She blinked again. slower this time, as if something in her head was recalibrating. "The court's going to make a decision soon," she said. "You still have time to cooperate. We can do this without a fight. Quietly." I shook my head. "You already chose the fight. You just didn't expect me to fight back." Her face hardened. "You're making a mistake." "No, Sarah, you did, when you decided I was easier to erase than to respect." She stared at me for a long time, the way someone stares at a locked door they once had a key to. Then she turned and walked back to her car. As she reversed out of the driveway, she didn't look back once. That evening I received an email from her attorney. It was polite, terse, and full of implication. A warning shot dressed as protocol. Attached were supplemental affidavits, statements from two of Sarah's acquaintances who had witnessed erratic behavior. One was Marcus, the other was a woman I didn't even recognize. Both claimed I had shouted at them without provocation, struggled to recall names, and once left the stove on overnight. All lies. Carefully chosen lies, not dramatic enough to be obviously false, but enough to plant doubt in a court's mind, enough to paint a picture. Martin told me not to worry. "Their testimony won't hold up," he said, "especially not after your evaluation. But we'll have to be thorough. They're playing the long game." That phrase, "the long game," stayed with me. Because it meant Sarah wasn't just angry. She was invested, determined. And that's when I realized the money wasn't the only thing she wanted. She wanted the story, the narrative, the role of the dutiful daughter burdened with an ailing father, maybe for guilt, maybe for sympathy, maybe even just to win. 3 days before the hearing, I received a notice from my bank. Sarah had attempted to access one of my accounts online. She claimed she was an authorized co-signer, which she was not. When the request was denied, she filed a complaint stating I had become unreachable and possibly incapacitated. The fraud department flagged it and froze the account for 48 hours pending verification. I spent that morning on the phone with customer service, re-establishing identity protocols, changing passwords, and setting up alerts. Every minute of it felt like a violation. Like I had to prove I was real, because someone I raised had insisted I wasn't. The next day the home phone rang. I hadn't answered it in weeks since it became clear Sarah had given the number to half her contacts, but this time something made me pick up. The voice on the other end was quiet, nervous, female. "Mr. Brigham?" she said. "You don't know me, but my name is Denise. I used to work with your daughter." I didn't know what to say. "Okay." She hesitated. "I just wanted you to know what she's doing. It's not new." She did the same thing to her ex-husband's grandmother. She convinced the family to give her guardianship, then liquidated the woman's assets, said it was all legal, and technically it was. But it wasn't right. My chest felt tight. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I have a father too," she said. "And because I saw what she did, and I can't be quiet about it anymore." I thanked her, asked her to speak with Martin. She agreed, quietly but firmly. I hung up the phone and sat in the dark for a long time. The anger I'd carried for weeks began to transform. Not into peace, not yet, but into resolve. Sarah had made a mistake, not by coming after me, but by assuming I had nothing left to protect. No allies, no memory, no fight. That night, I took out Janine's old photo album, the one Sarah never cared about. I flipped through page after page of birthdays, vacations, Christmas mornings. I found pictures of Sarah as a girl, smiling up at me, her hands covered in finger paint, her eyes lit with joy. I studied those photos the way you study crime scene evidence, looking for the moment everything shifted. I didn't find it. But I found something else, a picture of Janine holding Sarah at age 4, her eyes meeting mine across the lens. There was love in that photo. Real, whole, unbroken love. I realized then that Sarah hadn't just betrayed me. She'd betrayed the woman who gave her everything. And that was a sin I could never forgive. By the time the court date arrived, I was ready. The courtroom was smaller than I'd imagined, more utilitarian than grand. Fluorescent lights, beige walls, a few framed photographs of local officials, and a faint smell of disinfectant in the air. It felt more like a DMV than the setting for a life-altering confrontation. Yet, as I took my seat at the respondents' table, with Martin beside me and the judge's bench looming ahead, I understood that this was where everything that had unraveled in the past 2 months would either be restored or irreparably severed. Sarah sat across from me, perfectly composed, her attorney whispering something in her ear. She wore a cream-coloured blouse and a pearl necklace I recognized from Janine's jewelry box. It made my stomach tighten. She had taken even that. The judge, a stern woman in her early 60s, called the session to order. Sarah's lawyer opened with a statement full of soft words and sharp implications. Concern, confusion, diminished capacity, familial duty. He described me as a man who had increasingly withdrawn from social contact, who was at risk of financial exploitation, and who had resisted reasonable offers of help. I sat there listening to the fictional version of myself being unspooled. Like a character in a cautionary tale, according to them, I was confused, volatile, stubborn to the point of self-harm. According to them, I was a man whose rights needed to be temporarily reassessed for his own safety. According to them, I was already gone. Martin stood up and began calmly dismantling their narrative. He presented the psychiatric evaluation from Dr. Llewellyn, the social worker's report from the surprise inspection, the bank's documentation of Sarah's unauthorized access attempt. He introduced the affidavit from Denise, the former colleague, who had risked her own job to tell the truth about Sarah's past manipulations. And then he turned to me and said, "Mr. Brigham, would you like to speak for yourself?" I rose slowly, not from weakness but from deliberation. I looked directly at the judge, then over at Sarah, who averted her eyes. "My name is Walter Brigham," I said. "I am 81 years old. I built my house with my own hands. I raised a daughter who used to draw me pictures of unicorns and tape them to the fridge. I buried my wife 7 years ago. I make my coffee every morning. I pay my bills. I remember the names of every neighbor who's ever lived next to me. I remember the smell of Janine's shampoo. I remember every word of the song we danced to at our wedding. I am not confused. I am not forgetful. I am not unsafe. I am alone. And that is not a condition. It is a fact." I paused. The room was quiet. My daughter claims she's trying to help me, but she never asked me what I needed. She moved strangers into my house, into my bed, and called it generosity. When I protested, she accused me of paranoia. When I stood my ground, she filed a motion to take away my voice. That is not love. That is conquest. I could feel my pulse hammering in my ears, but my voice was steady. I may be old, I may be slower than I used to be, but I know who I am, and I know when I'm being erased. I sat down. Martin gave me a look that said everything, that it was enough, that I had reclaimed something no paper could declare or deny. The judge called a short recess. Sarah avoided my gaze the entire time. When the session resumed, the judge delivered her ruling in a measured tone. She denied the guardianship petition, citing lack of evidence, credible refutation, and what she described as a troubling pattern of control masked as care. She concluded with a note that hung in the air like a bell. Mr. Brigham remains the sole legal steward of his estate, his property, and his autonomy. This court recognizes not only his mental competence, but his moral clarity. It was over. Or at least the official part was. Sarah looked stunned, her face pale, her fingers clenching and unclenching in her lap. Her lawyer leaned in, whispering urgently, but she didn't respond. I didn't approach her. I didn't need to. There was nothing left to salvage in that room. Outside, the sun was too bright. It made me squint. I hadn't cried in the courtroom, but when I stepped onto the sidewalk and felt the warmth on my skin, the tears came, sudden and quiet. Martin placed a hand on my shoulder. "You're free," he said simply. And for the first time in weeks, I believed it, but I also knew something else. Sarah wasn't finished. In the days that followed the court's decision, the silence from Sarah was deafening. No calls, no emails, no visits, just a vacuum where obligation used to live. But I didn't fill it with questions. I let it be. I let her absence rest like a weight that had finally slipped off my shoulders. I returned home, not just to my house, but to my life. Not as it had been, but as it had become. The doors locked only from the inside. My name was the only one on the mailbox. The bed was mine again. And so was the silence. It wasn't always peaceful. Some nights it roared. But it was mine. I began the small rituals of reclamation. I changed the locks, every last one. I replaced the sheets Sarah had insisted on changing to something more modern with the old ones Janine had sewn herself. Faded, floral, soft. I took down the plastic spice rack Sarah had taped to the cabinet and found the old wooden carousel Janine had loved in the basement, wiped off dust, and set it back where it belonged. I deleted Sarah's contact from my phone, not out of rage, but out of mercy, for her and for me. She had chosen her story, and I had chosen mine. And then came the mail. A letter, handwritten in a shaky script I didn't recognize. Inside was a card, plain, cream-colored, with only a few lines of text. "Dear Grandpa, I'm sorry. I didn't know what was happening. I only found out after Mom took us back to Eden Prairie. I miss you. I'd like to see you. Love, Matthew, the younger of Sarah's sons. The quiet one, the one who never interrupted, never rolled his eyes. He had noticed more than I thought. I held the letter in my hand for a long time. My chest ached, not from regret, but from something more dangerous. Hope. I placed the card in Janine's old recipe box, between her famous banana bread and the meatloaf she used to make on Sundays. It would stay there until I was ready. A month later, I sold the second car Sarah had left in my garage. The title was in both our names, but she hadn't responded to the DMV letters, and by law, it was declared abandoned. I used the money to install a new furnace and have the roof inspected. I hired a gardener. Not a service, but a man named Alvin, who was about my age and liked to talk while he trimmed hedges. We drank lemonade after he worked, and he told me stories about his time fixing railways in Montana. He didn't know anything about Sarah. I didn't offer. We talked about football, back pain, jazz. Things that didn't have to be weighed against disappointment. On Sundays, I walked to the farmer's market. I bought too many peaches. I cooked soup and froze the leftovers. I started writing again. Nothing serious, just memories, scenes, moments. The sound of Janine laughing at the radio. The time Sarah fell off her bike and refused to cry. The smell of cut grass before a thunderstorm. I wrote these things down because they belonged to me, and no one had the right to alter them, not even their subjects. One morning, while clearing out the attic, I found a box I hadn't seen in years, Janine's letters. She used to write me notes and hide them in the most absurd places. Under my pillow, inside my sock drawer, between the pages of the TV guide. One read, "You're grumpy in the morning, but I love you anyway." Another said, "If you die before me, I'll haunt you." in love, of course. I read them all, every single one, and by the time I reached the bottom of the box, I realized something simple, something final. I hadn't been abandoned. I had been released. Sarah could no longer harm me. Her betrayal, no matter how cruel, had an end. Mine did not. Mine was rooted in memory, in love honestly earned and truthfully lost. I no longer needed revenge. I had peace. Not the kind you fight for, but the kind you choose when fighting costs too much. I made tea. I sat by the window. The sun warmed the floorboards, and for the first time in years I didn't feel like a man counting what was taken from him. I felt like a man who still had something left. After the storm passes, what remains isn't calm, it's debris. Things are not where they were. The silence that returns isn't the same silence that was taken. It has edges now, and a memory. That's what the weeks after the trial felt like. A kind of reordered quiet, where nothing had been broken loudly, but everything had shifted in a way I couldn't ignore. I didn't speak of the courtroom to anyone. Martin called me once to say a letter from the judge was in the mail confirming the dismissal, and that Sarah's petition would be sealed as closed. He spoke carefully, gently, the way people do after funerals. But I wasn't grieving. I was trying to relearn the shape of my own space, the rhythm of my days, without the shadow of accusation hanging over each movement. You don't realize how tightly you've been clenching until your hands are open again. I started waking up early again, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I'd make breakfast, eggs if I was hungry, toast if I wasn't, and I'd sit at the table without turning on the news. The light came through the window differently. I don't know if it really changed or if I had just forgotten how to notice it. I'd walk out into the yard and listen to the sounds I used to take for granted. The creak of the gate, the distant hum of a neighbor's lawn mower, the wind in the maple tree Janine planted when Sarah was born. Everything had a kind of echo now, not haunting, just permanent. I found myself sorting things I hadn't touched in years. Boxes in the attic, drawers full of paper clips and dead batteries, old letters from friends I'd lost touch with. I wasn't organizing out of boredom. I was reclaiming. It's amazing how many parts of a home can be slowly overwritten without you noticing. Sarah's mugs were gone from the cupboards, but I still found one of Marcus's shirts in the dryer. I threw it out without a word. I donated the twin beds she'd put in the guest room. I put Janine's old books back on the shelf. I dusted the frame around our wedding photo and moved it back to the mantel. Every action was small, but it felt like chiseling myself back into the space where I had become invisible. I received a second letter from Matthew, this one longer. He wrote that he missed my stories. He asked if I remembered the camping trip we took when he was 7, the one where the raccoon stole our marshmallows, and I told him it was a ghost. I laughed reading it. Not just because I remembered, I did, but because it reminded me that some part of my story still lived in someone else's memory. I wrote him back, told him I remembered the way he held onto my hand the whole night and refused to sleep in the tent alone, told him he was braver than he thought, told him my door was open, but only if he came alone. I didn't mention Sarah. He didn't either. One day I found myself in the den, staring at the spot on the wall where the family photo used to hang, the one Sarah took down because it was old and crooked. I pulled it out of the hall closet, dusted off the glass, and hung it again, crooked and all. I looked at our faces. Me, Janine, Sarah at 15, wearing braces and holding a rescue dog we only kept for 3 months. We all looked so sure, so unaware. I didn't feel sad looking at it. I felt precise. I remembered who we were before time added layers we didn't ask for, and I knew now that remembering was its own kind of survival. The town moved on without noticing what had happened in that courtroom. I still went to the market, still stopped by the hardware store, still nodded to strangers. People didn't see a man who had been almost erased. They saw a man with white hair and steady hands and maybe a few too many stories. That was fine with me. Let them think I was just old. Let them underestimate what it means to live long enough to bury the people who wronged you, not in the ground, but in your heart. Sarah didn't write. She didn't call. I saw on the county records that she'd moved out of her townhouse 2 weeks after the hearing. I didn't check where she went. I didn't ask around. She had chosen a different map, and I had no interest in tracing it. The idea that she might someday regret what she did no longer comforted or enraged me. It simply didn't matter. You don't need apologies from people who no longer occupy space in your life. What you need is air, and I had plenty of that now. I started volunteering at the library twice a week. Nothing dramatic, just helping sort books, fixing the occasional jammed printer, talking to people who didn't want to go home just yet. There was a woman there named Edna who wore mismatched earrings and had a laugh like a wind chime. She asked me once if I'd ever been married, and I said yes, but she'd been gone for some time now. She asked if I was still angry at the world, and I told her no, just slower to forgive. We shared coffee once or twice. Nothing romantic. Just warmth in a world that had grown a little colder. Sometimes I wonder what Janine would have said about all of it. I like to think she would have been proud that I stood up for myself, but mostly I think she would have been sad. Not because of what Sarah did, but because of what it cost to reveal who she truly was. There's grief in that kind of discovery. Not for the person themselves, but for the version of them you carried all your life. I had to let go of that version. I had to bury the daughter I thought I raised so I could finally breathe again. Now, when people ask me how I'm doing, I don't say fine, I say free. And when they ask what I mean, I just smile and say, that's a long story. And it is. But not one I tell out loud, not all at once. Some stories you write into the walls, into the way you arrange your books, into the locked drawers and dusty photographs and quiet mornings where the kettle sings like it used to before the world tried to convince you that your time was over. It isn't over. It's just mine again.